Board President, Jake Kavari. I'm Darla Cooper. I'm the Executive Director for IRPE, and we're going to get started. Let's go to the next slide and start with a bit of an overview. All right, so our purpose for doing this survey, we started in the first time doing this in 2021. It now aligns with our new strategic plan. If you haven't taken a look at that, I invite you to do that. But we have a goal that talks about engaging the system in diversifying basically the pipeline for IRPE professionals so that it more closely reflects the demographics of our students. It also, if we don't collect this information, it's hard to really know how to act upon our commitment to advancing racial equity and social justice. We also just want to have a better understanding of who we are as a community, within the RP group, but also the larger IRPE community and field. Again, it helps us better position ourselves as an organization to support that community. It helps us track our demographics in relationship to others in the state and how it is changing or over time. And we really want to be looking at internally, how well do we as an organization, different parts reflect the IRPE community demographics. So that's how we got started. Let's go to the next slide. So again, I mentioned we did this survey for the first time in 2021 fall, and then we repeated it in fall of 2023. Internal RP group, it consists of our board members, our staff members, and the different consultants that work with us on professional development and research projects. So we did get to see an improvement over last time in terms of the number of respondents to the survey, especially among the IRPE community. Last time it was 29%, so we're up to 43. Still want to try to get it a lot closer to what I would call census levels of a much higher proportion of folks taking the survey. Next slide, please. So what we're going to go through with you today is we're going to share the demographics that we have about the IRPE community first. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jake to talk about how our internal demographics, specifically with the board, compare to those of the IRPE community. And then we have some information about how the IRPE community compares to other constituent groups, like administrators, faculty, students in the CCC system. And then we're going to wrap up with some kind of key takeaways and hopefully get some feedback from you about we have some questions for you at the end. So no breakout rooms, just going to ask you to either come off mute or put it in the chat. So no worries, nobody needs to leave because of breakout rooms. I know how that works. So just if you hopefully answer those questions for us at the end. All right, let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to kick us off with taking you through what we have in terms of the IRPE community. Next slide, please. So when we look at it by role, you can see that in both 21 and in 23, the majority of respondents are analysts, a little bit more than half. Bit of an increase there, a little bit of a decrease, proportionally speaking, for our deans, directors, and coordinators, and very similar levels for executive and other folks. So fairly comparable across the 2 years. Next slide, please. So this one, we asked people how long they had been in the IRPE field. And so what you see there with the orange dots, it represents people, and as do the gray ones, but we kind of drew a line there in terms of less experience or more experience. Sorry, that doesn't come out as well here as it does when you look at it on the computer. But what you can see is that the majority of the dots in both years are to the left, meaning that more of the field has fewer than 10 years of experience. And if we go to the next slide, we asked the same question, but just specifically, how much experience or how many years have you been working in IRPE in the California community college system? But the same pattern, essentially, slight, differences, but you've got even more people who maybe came from IRPE in another system. in terms of being more people with fewer than 10 years of experience. So the next slide. Then we do the same thing, but then factor in people's roles. And again, you can see the scale there in terms of the analysts being the gray dots, our dean directors and coordinators, orange, those who declined to state, blue, our executives, and yellow, and other with the black dot there. But you can see that among our deans, directors, coordinators, and executives, more likely than analysts to have more than 10 years experience. That shouldn't be a great surprise. That kind of tracks. Let's go to the next slide, which again, very similar slide or results here in terms of when we asked about their IRPE experience in the CCC system, same pattern emerges. So when we look at it by gender, what we're finding is that our women and our non-binary respondents have less experience in IRPE than our men respondents, but the gap has closed between 21 and 22 between at least women and men in terms of women having more experience at that point. The next slide again has the same question in terms of with the CCC specific experience, and same pattern holds here again with women, non-binary, men, and the gap closing. So let's go to the next slide. So this one actually, we only asked this in 20, we didn't ask this in 21. It was some of the feedback that we actually got when we did the survey the first time was that we should ask about age. So that's why you don't see a 21, 22 comparison here. But again, tracks that our respondents that were younger than 35 were more likely to be our newer professionals. So that's why you see like the large bar there, 100% for under 25, 72% for those between 25 and 34. So we'll see, you know, when we do the survey again in 2025, which I can't believe is already time next year to do that, we'll see how we'll have 2 data points for this one at that time. Again, the next slide has the same question, but with, again, very similar patterns here with people under 35 being newer to the profession. So we also asked on the survey of whether people consider themselves part of the LGBTQ plus community, and the proportion of respondents from this community with fewer than 5 years of experience actually doubled between 21 and 22. And so that is, if you're looking at the chart, it's the orange bar going from 21% to 42%. But you can also notice that's because we went from 14 respondents to 26. So I think a lot of that kind of is accounted for in almost doubling the number of respondents from this community. So again, I think another data point will be very helpful in once we are able to add the 2025. And then when we add the CCC, you notice it's not the same, that they're relatively similar between the two groups. So there is a difference in terms of those who have had experience in IRPE outside of our system. So let's go to the next slide. So before we share, we did ask about ancestry, race, ethnic ancestry, and for the purposes of this time and to make it consistent with the last time, we did do some collapsing and recoding. And this just lets you know how we did that. So if the person marked Hispanic or Latina or X, we put them in that category. If they selected more than one, we put it in multi-ancestry. We collapsed East, South, and Southeast Asian with Filipina OX into Asian. And then all the other categories listed there were included. And then any other response that didn't fit into the above categories was put into other. So I think we can go to the next slide. So it's a lot of, information, but what it is that we did have greater proportion of African-American, multi-ancestry, and white professionals with 10 or more years experience in 23 than we had in the 21 survey. So that was one of the big shifts from one year to the next. I'm going to pause just here because there's a lot of information. Go back, please. to the previous slide, just pausing, just a lot to take in. And we will obviously post all this on our website, and this is the webinar is being recorded, so that will also be on the website. But it's a lot of information to kind of take in. We try to put those headlines up there just to kind of boil down to some of the most significant changes between 21 and 23. Okay, let's go to the next one. Again, it's the same pattern of looking at it in the CCC system. And when we look at that more specifically, it's only our African American and our Black professionals with 10 or more years of experience had actually increased. So there's that. So let's go to the next one. Now, this is where we are looking at the position by gender, right? And so what we learned in this case was that the proportion of women who were deans, directors, and coordinators did grow up, as well as the proportion of men who were executives went up again between 21 and 23. When we look at position by age, again, the majority of our analysts are younger than 35, and the majority of executives are 45 or older. So we have that. Next one here for our LGBTQ plus, the representation did increase among analysts and executive positions. And when we look at it by ancestry, what we have a couple of things here. Our Asian and Hispanic professionals were more likely to be analysts and less likely to be executives. And the proportion of our African American Black professionals who were deans, directors, coordinators, and executives did increase, and kind of consequently, the proportion of white professionals who were deans, directors, or coordinators decreased. Again, these are all proportions, so not necessarily the numbers, although we put the counts up there for those groups that had more than 10 respondents. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is where I hand it over to Jake to kind of tell you, after we've gone through what the IRPE professionals look like. Oh, wait, before I do that, I did see a couple of things in the chat. I'm wondering if I should pause here since we have a little bit of time and see if I can answer these. I saw them pop up, but I didn't get to read them. Rosalina, I won't comment on that. I will leave that one alone. I could get into trouble, but you know that I'm with you, Rosaline. So you and I have been here together for a very long time. Okay. And then Luis, could it be that women, non-binary folks self-identify as having less experience, being a gendered thing when that might not be the case? I saw you come on camera, Luis. You want to expound?
Yeah, good afternoon, buenas tardes, everyone. So I know there's been some like reports on just on the EEO of it all that women and non-binary folks would, when they're applying for job applications, they won't sell themselves sort of the same rate as male or men applicants. So I was just thinking out loud about maybe that's the case here where women or non-binary or other gender folks will say, hey, I don't have that much experience when you're as good as a man. You know your worth. So that's what I was thinking about there.
No, it's a good point. There's lots of studies on that. In this particular case, we strictly asked them how many years of experience they had, not what experience they have. So I'm hoping that was, you should, that people are just telling us how many years. So when we say less experienced, we just mean less in terms of years, not the quality, but the quantity of it. And then there is no to answer your second question, there is no rationale for including it. I think that was just we hadn't added the I to the LGBTQ plus. No rationale, just that's how we have been asking the question, and we had not been asked or suggested to add it, but we can going forward for sure. Any other questions before we hand it over to Jake? Jake, take it away.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to see so many familiar faces. So now what we're going to do is walk through just the comparison of the RP group board and then our community, IRPE. So the point being is that we've been actively recruiting from a board perspective and being intentional with that. So this is one way for us as a board to look holistically at that and ensure that we're meeting things that we set for in our various plans. So next slide, please. So what you have here, so the next few slides are set up the same way. So just so you can compare them. And then this one, we do not have 2023, but we'll be adding 2023 data for the ones that do have that data available. I'm sorry, for 2021. So we didn't ask that in 2021, but here's 2023. So we'll be adding 21 because we do have data. But in this case, what you'll see is at the very top, we have our community, the breakdown from analysis, dean, director, the executive level, other, and decline to state. And then underneath, we have the board. So we ask the same questions of board members so we can compare the two. And in this one, what you can see is the proportion of deans and directors is higher. You can see that with the 68% for the board compared to 32% when it comes to the community. And then you can see how it's kind of flip-flop, just almost right on par when a percentage proportion breakdowns on for an analyst, it's 58% in the community and then 26%. So this is an area of definitely a focus for us as a greater board. So we'll come back to the summary, but this slide gives it. So the next slide, please. So then the next one here, you can see, as mentioned, again, it's still the community at the top for the breakdown. And now we have 21 data and 23 visible. So we can kind of see the progress in changes in the community, which is being mentioned in prior slides, but then we're comparing it below to the board. And in this case, what we can see is that the representation of women on the board has increased. So specifically that 42% for the board in 21 to 53% in 23, but it still remains lower than what we see in our community with the 63% in 23. So you can kind of see there's some improvement here and also a focus that we need to continue on the work that we're doing. So next slide, please. Then on this one, we're looking at those that identify LGBTQ plus to those that do not. And again, you can see, again, the community at the top and then the board at the bottom. And you can see that there's been a slight increase for those on the RP board. And that's that 11% on the bottom left to the 16% in 23. So again, that's showing some progress, but then continue to ensure that we continue that work as a board. So I'm just going to take a moment for those 3 slides because they're broken down and make sure there's no questions at this point. And I think as stated with Darla saying that we're going to have this available, recording and also the slides. Is there anything? All right, so next slide, please. So then ancestry comparison, this one definitely shows pieces inside here for us. Again, community at the top, RP board at the bottom. We can see that the RP board is slightly less diverse in ancestry composition compared to the community. And specifically, you can look at Hispanic or Latina, O, and X, where you see the 11% in 21. You see the increase for 20 to 21% in 20. For 23 for us as a board. So there is some progress, but then there still is areas for improvement. And we're going to kind of tie those all together here from the greater kind of system when we think about it in the next few slides. All right, so this is where we move into those comparisons and look across and see where we can improve in a couple different areas, both in our community and also as a board. So next slide, please. So here is the proportion, which I think is one of the findings that came out of this work was just the community. So the proportion of women in our community is higher relative to all other CCC employee groups and the RP group overall. So what this does is just pulling the various data ones. You can see the administrator, classified, full-time faculty, part-time faculty, the student population, also then our community, and then RP group internally. And so pointing that out on those last ones right there, you can see our community with the 62% in 21, and then in 23, we can see the 63%. And then across the board there, you can see that proportion is higher than other ones as mentioned, other employee groups. So next slide, please. Now, this last one is then comparing ancestry composition of the RP group and our community to the CCC administrators, classified, full-time faculty, part-time faculty, and also students that I already mentioned. And so what you can see here is that the RP group and also the community and the administrators are more diverse than CCC faculty, but still, again, this is the point that I was kind of mentioning, is that still less diverse than our student population. So that's the part of where we can collaborate and work and be strategic about. So I'll go to the next slide here just as a point, and this is kind of the wrap up piece, and this is the part where we want to definitely discuss and ask you all, and that's kind of why we have this thing, is for feedback and kind of next steps. So next slide, please. So this is the summary, and what wanting to get to is that there is greater representation with the 23 sample relative to 21. That you can see that response rate. So I know, Darla, you already kind of mentioned that, is like we definitely improved here, but we want to continue that work. So that's one where we all need to ensure when it is out that we do it, so that we have, being as close to 100% is what we want to do in this case. So this is where that second bullet came in, and you can kind of see with the data points that were presented to you that there's been improvements in gender and LGBTQ plus representation on the board, but more can be done for those historically marginalized communities. And then kind of going to that third bullet, I kind of mentioned it a little bit already, but there's still work to be done to increase, Hispanic, Latina, OX, and Asian representation among dean, director, coordinators, and executives for our positions. And I think one of those pieces is I know in I'm going to make this mention, our strategic plan, right, is to diversify the pipeline when it comes to our field. And so that came, these different data pieces, and the intentionality with it is reviewing all this stuff to be set, key performance indicators as an organization, ensure that we're doing it. So one of the big ones I know, what I'm just going to kind of mention before we go into all the questions, is just engaging with statewide student senate, right? That's one of the big ones. And then also the student population, of creating opportunities within our offices. So one thing that we can hold ourselves accountable for collectively is that we're in positions at our colleges. Those students take classes and they are in fields that align with our field, right? Institutional research and effectiveness professionals. And so how do we ensure that we create opportunities for them to get the experience to go into our field, right? That would really, and just something that's inside our control as a collective. So with that, I think the next slide, we're going to kind of touch base before I go, and we'll just stay here, but I just want to make sure there's no questions what was covered at this point. Doesn't look like it. All right, so let's, I think, open it up a little bit with the discussion questions. I know this is like, again, start with that first one, which is what stands out to you in the data? Does anyone want to highlight or see popped up? I know, Luis, you did a couple different pieces right off the bat, so we appreciate that. Anyone else? Additional ones?
Feel free to raise your hand, or you can use the chat.
Go ahead. Talia?
Hey, thank you so much for sharing this information. Currently pursuing my doctoral degree, and my dissertation is about women of color in post-secondary education, as in any particular role. I'm in the very nascent state of this research. But one thing that I found is that there is a lot of scarcity of support for women of color to be in higher level roles. For example, I am a director here, but there is not many of me that not many like me that are in this type of research roles. In the 4 year, actually, in academic, there is very little opportunity for women to be in research whatsoever, women of color. So when I'm looking at this data, I'm kind of seeing that a lot of the stuff that I'm finding in the experiences of women are very related to the fact that they might not choose, or they might find intimidating to be in certain spaces. Although you see participation, we are now more friendly, and I'm glad to see that there is increase in of women in this sector. But what is kind of the takeaway for us as a system thinking about support women to come to research and planning and institutional effectiveness? What are we doing to make sure that women of color see this as a career opportunity from the get-go? Because I'm talking about students. Right now, I'm in a mentoring program with CARE, mentoring a Latina woman, but there's not many mentoring or sponsorship opportunities, if you will, to support people to come to this career. So is there any particular effort that you think we can focus on, or maybe look into why we have it used to be just the typical type of prototype of researcher that we are now searching. I'm guessing I'm mumbling because yesterday I did a presentation about my findings so far in the lead review, and it's appealing to see the little representation that we have.
Great question, Natalia. Nice to see you. I would say there's two pieces to this. There's the recruitment piece, which is to get them in the field, but there's also the advancement piece of helping them move up if that's what they want to do. So I'll take them kind of separately. As far as the recruitment piece, at least one of the things that we want to work on, and there's this, by the way, when I say this is one of the things. It's not like, oh, we found the solution and that's going to be it, but just one thing. It occurred to us to diversify the pipeline. Why don't we start with the students that you are on campuses with right now? I think it has to start then in terms of, how about just awareness? I don't think people, I mean, if you were at I think when we first kind of started talking about this, diversifying the pipeline, we were in a call just like this, and I asked people how many people wanted to be an institutional researcher when they grew up. And the answer was no one. And I actually did that at CARE a few weeks back, and not a single, well, there was one person actually who raised their hand, but it was because his mother was an IRPE professional. And she was there. It was very cute. We got their picture. It's great. Hopefully we'll use that at some point. But we acknowledge that he was different. Not necessarily the typical person that grows up. Maybe some of your children will become researchers. So there's that, starts in the home. But why don't we start with raising awareness of our position among the students that are at our colleges right now? Right? So what are you doing? So I mean, this is where I put it back. What are you doing on your campus to interact with your student government, to maybe have student workers, have some kind of, any kind of going to visit social science classes, statistics classes, doing presentations, going to career day? We have to promote this ourselves. So why don't you start where you live? Again, could be in your house, I don't know, but also where you live on campus, in terms of just letting people know this is a job, and this is a career that you might want to pursue, and share a little bit about your journey and what you do today and all of those things. So that's something that we're actually wanting to, we've been working on a guide actually that will include some of this information about how to diversify IRPE offices. Hopefully that will also come out this spring. So that's another thing that we're doing. So we're, just, it's very top of mind for us to speak about the promotion piece, or the advancement piece, is something we need to do more on, and just figuring out, and that's part of the guide in terms of creating more inclusive offices can help people, because retention is important to promotion, right? You have to stay in the field and build up your resume, so to speak, in order to advance to other positions. So I think that's at least one tactic to trying to make it possible for women and other historically underrepresented groups to advance to higher levels of positions. And I said, we do have, I hope that you're all able, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. And Dora, I know we didn't talk about this, but we should promote the IRPE Career Trajectory webinar while we're here. That is next week. I've seen this information. It's really good stuff. I really encourage you to make time to come to that, because it goes even deeper into some of this. Unfortunately, I'll spoiler, we do not have demographic information yet. But it is something else that we want to do, is to figure out how, like, what kind of differences there are with career trajectories based on demographics. So it's on our list. But so we have a lot of ideas and ambitions, and we're turning some of those into actions and making plans to turn others. So sorry, that was a super long answer to your question, but you got me excited about sharing what we're doing and what we're planning.
And I was going to say one thing too, though, just to add to that, is that going to statewide student senate, I'll say this, is that there were, so I went there and Alyssa presented with myself, and I'll say this is that, and Alyssa's here to speak to it as well, that there were students there that didn't really know fully about everything that we are and what we do, right? And so those are engaged students, and so they want to share emails and all those different pieces, and that's where we can be that person for them to build these, pipelines for them and see the opportunities. And I'm also going to add that from just there's a growing field of data science, right, in general. So there's so much data out there to analyze. There's not enough people to even do that at this point. So that's like, if they don't specifically go to our field, but there's a lot of other, organizations that need people, and having that diversified is really important as well in the private sector. So I think those are some things that us collectively is that we do have a lot within inside our control that we need to take an active approach in the work.
Great. Going next to Rosaline, you said go back to the one gender by role. Did you mean the first one that's just IRPE, folks? This one?
She said yes.
Okay. All right, we're here. All right, well, Rosaline takes a look at that. I'll go to the next question. I'm glad you asked this, Luis, about doing the survey at the conference. What we're actually, the only issue with doing it there is that everybody doesn't come to the conference. So we'd still have to have a way to get it to all the researchers and planners across all 116 colleges and 73 districts. But I saw your comment later, or comment/question later, about comparing the demographics of those who come to those of the community. And that is also on our list. Our to-do list is that, well, when you register for the conferences, we are going to start asking people for demographics, because I think it's something we need to be looking at is, are there groups that aren't coming to the conference? So you're reading our mind, Luis. We're on the same page, something that we need to be looking at. Again, it started, but if you think of, especially, going back to Rosaline's comment about old timers, I like to do seasoned or mature. I don't necessarily care for the term old timer, but especially being one, but we've never collected this information before as an organization, as a field. And so we weren't able, you just had your eyes to look around and see and perceive what you thought our demographics were. So again, that's why we want to get that response rate up, so that I would love for it to approach more of a census level response, where we know it's not, we're less of a sample, more of a census. So encouraging your fellow researchers to fill out the survey when it comes out next fall. We appreciate any and all help that we can get to keep that response number going up. But yes, we do need to look at how does participation in our events compare to the demographics of the community. Okay. Yes, the ends are very small. Going back to Rosaline's point, so they're very small. You can see they've been suppressed, so that means they're less than 10 in those two columns. Okay, so I'm going back to Fabian. Can you go back to the slide that showed the increase of white representation from, I guess, 41 to 53? Sure which one that is. Let's see.
I'm wondering if it's the board one.
Is it the board one?
I think it might be the board one.
Okay.
Don't mark me on that one about me remembering the right thing. One more back. Oh, there it is. This one, I think. Is that it? Looks like it's it.
So it didn't necessarily, 41 is in the IRPE community and the 53 is on the board. So it's not an increase. The increases go from left to right in these particular charts. So, but that 41 was 43 in the IRPE community, and it went from 47 to 53 among the board. Hopefully that clarifies. So it's hard to know how fast or slow to go with these slides and trying to, it's a lot of information to take it in. Okay. So thank you to Adore. She did share the link for you to register for next week. It's the 10th, Adore, or?
Yeah, it's Tuesday the 10th. I believe it's 12 to 1:30, but I think Alyssa's on here if she wants to say anything more about the webinar.
I'm sorry, which webinar?
The Career Trajectories webinar.
Yeah, we're just promoting it here because it came up.
Oh, yes. So the Career Trajectory webinar is going to be offered next week. And the focus of that webinar is going to be around some key findings and patterns that we've observed based on triangulating and mapping various sources of data like LinkedIn career information as well as transparent California information to understand how the IRPE field has changed over the last decade. And so what we're going to be sharing in that space is how many different positions, have been offered or made available to people in the IRPE field, changes in the various types of positions that we're seeing sort of evolve over time, salary information, as well as common what we call career trajectory. So how are people sort of moving in and out of various IRPE positions in the field, and to what extent do we see that movement happening within the last 10 years? That webinar is going to be followed up with a panelist discussion with a number of IRPE professionals who have sort of navigated their careers within IR into various roles and positions. So we have some individuals who have gone from analyst to a director and or dean position. We also have someone who went from a director position to now a college president. So we're hoping that the panelist discussion will provide some rich insights for attendees around some of the sort of lessons that these individuals have learned sort of navigating their own career paths, and some advice that they'll have for others who are trying to sort of navigate their own professional careers in IRPE. So it should be really good. And so we hope you all also join that space in that webinar.
Thank you, Alyssa. I know that was impromptu, so we appreciate you sharing that more detailed information. But I said we were having a conversation about kind of career trajectories and underrepresented groups, and I didn't steal your thunder. I didn't say who the guest was, but you mentioned in terms of someone who is currently a college president who got their start as a director of IR. So looking forward to that webinar next week. Okay, but back to this webinar. and what we're talking about. And so I just want to acknowledge Rosaline's comment about caregiving, and that role often, falls on women. And it's not terribly surprising that we're seeing more women in the analyst role versus the managers roles. So that is true. So would love to hear your thoughts about these other two questions in terms of, we talked a little bit about implications and some of the stuff that we're planning to do, but what other thoughts do you have in terms of RP Group's role, how we could support you in terms of that recruitment, retention, advancement of diverse and inclusive researchers and planners? And then if you have any other ideas about how to get the response rates up, we obviously will. I think we did ask our board members to, promote this, but we'll definitely be doing that again, getting that personal email from someone saying, please fill out the survey. The other thing, if you don't remember from the survey, is that we do it every 2 years in order to keep it anonymous, because otherwise we'd have to make it not anonymous and then, only give you a chance to change your answer if something has changed. Obviously age changes, things, demographics can change. So that's why we do it every 2 years. Marcel thinks we should do a hype video. I'm going to put you in it if that's what you want to do. Any other thoughts or suggestions? Anything, anybody, you can still answer the first question if there's something else that stood out to you in the data. Okay, now Daisy's got TikTok videos. Again, if you want to be in them, more than happy to help you figure out how to do that. I'm not going to be in. There's enough video of me out there. No, not starring the executive director. That's a no. Plus, if I did a video, just be like, please, please, please fill it out. I don't know if people want to watch that. And I'm not dancing. That's absolutely not going to happen. I don't know what a demographic survey dance would look like anyway. Probably not good. Somebody filling out a survey. Although we don't do it on paper anymore. So is it typing? No. Please, please. I don't know if you all are following this. I love this community. We're all very friendly and informal with each other. No competition. Gen X and Gen Z. Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm biased. I like our dances better, but whatever. Well, we won't keep you. If you do think of something, you know how to reach me or Jake or Adore. Feel free, Alyssa, any of us, just let us know. If you think of anything else, you have other ideas for how we can help you diversify the pipeline to IRPE, the IRPE profession. Again, if you have other ideas about how to increase response rates, I would love. If you're here today, then number one, when the survey comes out next fall, we need you to fill it out. That's number one. But also encouraging those, at your college or your district, in your office, encouraging people, other, colleagues that you have, making sure that, kind of holding each other accountable to say, hey, did you fill out your survey when that's out? And so be looking for that next fall. But if there's nothing else, we'll let everyone, I think our last slide there, probably, what is our last slide? Nope. Other direction. Oh, just some implications. Jake, did you want to cover this and then we can let folks go?
Yeah, I can cover this. So you can see this on here. In a lot of ways, we kind of discussed some of these bullets already. So I feel kind of like it's a good summary and implications for us as a greater community, like that was already mentioned. So really getting analysts to run for the board. I know that's also, we have at-large positions. So that's something that we have definitely used as a criteria piece to make sure that it's representing the field. And that's kind of what I'm going on the next one right there, right? The at-large in its diversity and inclusion. So that's also specific and contributions. So those that are doing the work without celebrating, I think one thing is that everyone here knows people that are doing great work. And so we want to elevate them. I'm going to do a shameless plug on here. There's the RP awards that are happening right now that we revamped. So we have a rising star one that I'm really excited about. And there's also an equity champion one. So those are the two major ones as well. So we're definitely trying to elevate and ensure those people are seen. And then the next one is the hiring piece. So I think this definitely comes into the managers in the room, something to think about, and that you are in the room at times and there's our questions asked. So really making sure that we're implementing equitable hiring and recruitment practices that include the collecting of applicant demographics and looking at where we post announcements. So I know my college is actively looking on that and trying to ensure that our job descriptions and also our announcements, all those types of things. And then also the process, right? When you think about when people do submit and ensuring those things. So through the whole process. And I would add, the other one is the retention piece. So not only hiring people, but keeping them at your college as well. That's another piece of the pie, because you can get them here and they're hired, but then not have a sense of belonging and then no longer be with us. So I think that's where we can also be that part, right? When people are hired, we can be that community for them as well to make sure that they stay and ensure that. So those are the big summary. Darla, anything else to add to that I didn't cover?
No, just Adore was on top of it and put a link in the chat to our RP Group Awards. So encourage you to look at that and nominate. Some of them are self-nomination. If you think there's nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with tooting your own horn. So just look at those and see if yourself or someone, at your college or in your region, other colleagues that let's recognize them. Let's honor them. Let's congratulate them for the great work that they are doing. So please take a look at that webpage and see the deadline for this year's awards is January 13th. So please go ahead and get those nominations in as soon as possible.
And just to add to that, Darla, I'm always big on this too, is that sometimes people do not see themselves as doing that one. So just that personal email, that personal call that you can make to let them know that, man, this is really great. You should submit. It could be the difference maker. That's also running for the board. I mean, those are all the pieces that we're being very intentional with. And so, that's where we're in this together. And I was gonna say, Adore added the due date and everything, right as you were saying it. So right on it.
Yep.
As usual.
Well, we thank you for joining us today, for your feedback. I've made some notes about the next survey. We're just thankful to be a part of this community with you. And Hopefully we'll see you at the RP conference or peer-to-peer or the social justice collaborative, all of that. So hope to see you soon. Have a good day.